In the spring of 1931, in a prison in Cologne, a condemned man asked a psychiatrist a question. He wanted to know what would happen in the instant after the guillotine blade fell. Specifically, he wanted to know whether he would remain conscious just long enough to hear the sound of his own blood leaving his neck. He said that if he could, it would be the pleasure to end all pleasures. The psychiatrist, a man named Carl Berg, had by then spent months interviewing him, more hours than any doctor had ever spent with a killer of this kind. He wrote the question down because he was writing everything down, and the book he produced would become one of the founding texts of criminal psychology. The man who asked it was Peter Kürten. For 18 months, the German press had called him the Vampire of Düsseldorf, and for those 18 months, an entire industrial city of 500,000 people had been in a state of open panic. He was executed on the 2nd of July, 1931. And what he left behind was not just 9 bodies. It was a case that shaped how the modern world thinks about this kind of criminal, an ongoing argument about criminal responsibility, and one of the most influential films ever made. He was born on May 26, 1883, in Mulheim am Rhein, near Cologne. He was the third of 13 children. The family lived in a single room. His father was a violent alcoholic who beat his wife and children, and who was eventually convicted and imprisoned for sexual offenses against Kürten's own sister. The details of that household are in the court record, and the essential fact is that a large family lived, slept, and existed in one room where sustained sexual violence took place. Everything Peter Kürten later became, he learned there before he was 10 years old. He also claimed a great deal about his childhood that has never been verified, including that he drowned 2 other boys in the Rhine at the age of 9, and that a local dog catcher taught him to torture animals. Some of it may be true. Some of it is very likely embellishment, produced later for doctors and journalists who were listening closely. What is documented is his criminal record, and it is enormous. From adolescence onward, Kürten was in and out of prison almost continuously: theft, burglary, arson, fraud, assault, desertion from the army. He spent, by most reckonings, more than 20 years of his adult life in custody. He said later that prison suited him, that solitary confinement gave him time and quiet to construct elaborate fantasies of revenge against a society he considered had wronged him, and that he came out of each sentence with those fantasies more developed than when he went in. The German penal system of that era kept sentencing him and releasing him, and did not have any concept of what it was releasing. His first confirmed murder was in 1913. During a burglary at a tavern in Milheim, he came upon a 9-year-old girl named Christine Klein asleep and killed her. The case was investigated. Suspicion fell on the child's uncle, who had quarreled with her father and who was tried and acquitted. He lived under that shadow for the rest of his life. Peter Kürten confessed to the killing 17 years later and produced details only the killer could have known. He spent most of the First World War in prison for desertion. He was released in 1921, moved to Altenburg, and married a woman named Auguste, who had herself served a prison sentence. He told people he was a returning prisoner of war. By all accounts, he was, in this period, a completely ordinary man. He worked. He dressed carefully. He was polite, well-groomed, and mild-mannered. Neighbors later described him as pleasant. His wife described a considerate husband. In 1925, the couple moved to Düsseldorf, and in February of 1929, the city began to bleed. On the 3rd of February, a woman named Apollonia Ken was attacked in the street and stabbed repeatedly. She survived. 5 days later, a 9-year-old girl named Rosa Oliger was killed. 5 days after that, a 45-year-old mechanic named Rudolf Scheer was killed on his way home. Then, nothing, for months. And then, in August, it started again, and did not stop. On the 21st of August, 3 separate people were stabbed in the street in a single evening. All 3 survived. 2 days later, at a fairground in the Flehe district, 2 children, Gertrude Hamaher, aged 5, and Louise Lenson, aged 14, were killed after being sent home from the fair. The following day, a young woman named Gertrude Schulte was stabbed and survived. Through September and October, there were more. Ida Reuter, Elizabeth Dreer. 2 women attacked with a hammer on separate nights, both of whom lived. And on the 7th of November, a 5-year-old named Gertrude Alberman was killed. Now consider what the Dexeldorf police were actually facing, because it explains everything about why this took so long. There was no victim profile. He attacked young girls, adult women, and grown men. He attacked in daylight and after dark, in parks, on roads, near the fairground, in the city, and on its outskirts. There was no consistent method. He used knives, scissors, a hammer, and strangulation, sometimes switching between attacks in the same week. And more than half of the people he attacked survived, which meant descriptions existed, but they varied, because the attacks varied. In 1929, with no forensic linkage available beyond the obvious, a police force looking at that pattern could not even be certain it was one man. Some senior officers believed they were dealing with several offenders or with copycats. This was also Weimar Germany at its most fragile. The Wall Street crash had hit that October. Unemployment was climbing toward catastrophe. Communist and Nazi paramilitaries were fighting in the streets of German cities, and the police were widely distrusted by large sections of the population. Germany in the 1920s had already produced Fritz Haarmann in Hanover, Karl Grossmann in Berlin, and Karl Denke in Silesia. The public had reason to believe that this could happen and that the state could not stop it. Dexeldorf came apart. Women stopped going out after dark. Vigilante groups formed. Police received somewhere in the region of 900,000 letters and tips. Thousands of people were investigated. There were false confessions. One man confessed and was committed to an asylum, and the attacks continued while he was inside. And in the middle of it, Peter Kürten started writing to the newspapers. After the death of Gertrude Alberman, he sent a letter to a Dexeldorf paper containing a map. It marked the location of the child's body and a second location, in a field near Papendal, where he said another body would be found. Police dug there and recovered Maria Hahn, a young woman who had been missing since August. He had told them where she was. It made no difference. They still could not find him. The end came in May of 1930, and it came because of a young woman named Maria Budlik. She had just arrived in Seeldorf from Cologne looking for work with nowhere to stay. At the station, a man approached and offered to take her to a women's hostel. As they walked, she became uneasy. A second man intervened. He was calm, well-dressed, and reassuring, and he sent the first man away and offered to take her somewhere safe himself. He took her to his flat on Mettner Strasse, gave her something to eat, and then said he would walk her to the hostel. He led her instead into the Grafenberg woods and attacked her. And then, for reasons he was never able to explain adequately, he stopped. He asked her whether she remembered where he lived. She said no. He let her go. She did remember. But she was a young woman alone in a new city with no money and no standing, and she did not go to the police. She wrote a letter to a friend describing what had happened. She addressed it incorrectly. It was delivered to the wrong woman, who opened it, read it, and took it to the police. Detectives found Maria Budlik and asked her to walk the route. She led them to number 71 Mettner Strasse. Kürten saw her there, on the stairs, with police officers. He went to his wife and told her everything. And then he instructed her to go to the authorities and inform on him explicitly so that she could claim the reward money and support herself after he was gone. She did. Peter Kürten was arrested on the 24th of May, 1930, and surrendered without resistance. He then confessed to 79 separate offenses, including 9 murders and more than 30 attempted murders. He described attacks nobody had connected to him. He solved his own case in exhaustive detail over weeks. It was during this period that Dr. Carl Berg conducted his examinations. Berg's resulting study, published as The Sadist, was one of the first serious clinical attempts to describe the psychology of a sexual serial murderer from the subject's own account. It is still cited. Investigators building the earliest offender profiles decades later were working, in part from foundations Berg laid in a Düsseldorf prison in 1930. Berg's conclusion was that Kürten was not insane. He was, in Berg's assessment, entirely aware of what he was doing, capable of restraining himself when it suited him, and fully in control. Kürten's own statements supported that. He described choosing his moments, avoiding risk, and abandoning attacks when conditions were wrong, which is not the behavior of a man who cannot help himself. His trial opened in April of 1931. He was held in a purpose-built cage inside the courtroom. He was charged with 9 murders and 7 attempted murders, and he was, by the accounts of everyone present, calm, articulate, and cooperative. He was convicted and sentenced to death 9 times over. He was executed by guillotine at Klingelps prison in Cologne on the 2nd of July, 1931, at the age of 48. That same year, Fritz Lang released a film about a city consumed by the hunt for a child killer, in which the criminal underworld ends up conducting the manhunt because the police cannot. Lang always maintained the film was not based on any single case, but he made it in Germany in 1931, and audiences at the time knew exactly what they were watching. M is now widely regarded as the first serial killer film ever made, and one of the most influential films in cinema history. After the execution, Kürten's head was preserved, and it eventually made its way to the United States. It is on public display in a museum in Wisconsin, and members of the public pay to look at it, which is a strange final note, and probably the appropriate one. Peter Kürten spent his life demanding attention from a society he believed had discarded him. He wrote to newspapers. He drew maps for the police. He confessed at length to a doctor who wrote it all down. He asked, at the very end, whether he might get to experience his own death. He is still on a shelf somewhere, being looked at. The 9 people he killed were named Christine Klein, Rosa Oliger, Rudolf Scheer, Gertrude Hamacher, Louise Lenzen, Maria Hahn, Ida Reuter, Elizabeth Dreher, and Gertrude Alberman. 4 of them were children, and the person who stopped him was a young woman with no money, newly arrived in a strange city, who got away, remembered an address she had told him she had forgotten, and then wrote the letter to the wrong person. Number 2. Javed Iqbal. On Christmas Day, 1999, a letter arrived at the office of a Lahore newspaper. A second copy arrived at the Lahore police. Both said the same thing. A man named Javed Iqbal Mughal had killed 100 boys. Their ages ranged from 6 to 16. He had documented each one photographs, names, dates, possessions, and left everything in his house on Ravi Road for the authorities to find. He said he intended to drown himself in the river. Police dragged the Ravi with nets for days and found nothing. Then they went to the house. Inside, they found bloodstains on the walls and floor, a heavy iron chain, bags of clothing, and photographs, dozens and dozens of photographs of boys, labeled and organized. They found 2 large metal vats containing partially dissolved human remains, and they found a handwritten note explaining that the bodies in the house had deliberately not been disposed of so that the police would have evidence. He had prepared a crime scene for them. And then, for a month, he was gone, the subject of the largest manhunt in Pakistani history. On the 30th of December, 1999, He walked into the offices of the Daily Jang in Lahore. Not a police station, a newspaper. He told reporters he had surrendered to the press because he believed the police would kill him if he surrendered to them. His name was Javed Iqbal. He is the most prolific convicted killer in the history of Pakistan, and his case is, among other things, a record of what happens when a city's poorest children have no one counting them. He was born in 1961 in Lahore, the sixth of 8 children in a wealthy family. His father, Muhammad Ali Mughal, was a successful trader who owned multiple properties in the Shadbagh area. Javed Iqbal did not grow up poor. He did not grow up neglected. He inherited millions of rupees when his father died in 1993. He had vehicles, a swimming pool, and a large house. He was educated at Government Islamia College and started a steel recasting business in 1978. And he had a documented history of sexual offenses against children that stretched back at least 15 years before the killings began. Complaints of sodomy were lodged against him in 1985. Further complaints were lodged in 1990. He was arrested on at least one occasion. He was never convicted of any of the charges. He later stated in his confession and in media interviews that his arrest had been unjust and had humiliated him. He said his mother had been forced to witness his decline and had died of grief. He described his motive in a sentence that has been quoted across Pakistan for a quarter of a century. He wanted to make 100 mothers cry for their sons, the way his mother had cried for him. That is a motive statement. It is not an explanation. An explanation would require understanding how a wealthy man with education and resources decided that the response to his own humiliation was the systematic murder of children who had nothing to do with it. No explanation of that kind has ever been produced, and he died without providing one. What is clear from the record is that he planned, methodically, over a period of years, to gain access to vulnerable boys. He opened a video game shop in Shadbagh, reported to be the first of its kind in the neighborhood, and offered tokens to boys at reduced rates, or free. When families stopped sending their children there, he shut it down and opened a fish aquarium instead. When that stopped working, he opened a gym. Each business had one purpose. The killing spree itself ran from June to November of 1999. 6 months, roughly 100 boys in roughly 140 days. His victims were drawn almost entirely from one population, the street children of Lahore. In 1999, Lahore had a large and visible population of children living and working on the streets, runaways. Orphans, boys who had been sent out to earn, boys who had left abusive homes. They slept in parks, near monuments, at railway stations. They shined shoes, folded cardboard, collected scrap. Some of them gathered in the gardens around Minari Pakistan, the national monument in the heart of the city. That is where many of them were last seen. Iqbal lured them with what they needed: food, money, shelter, the promise of work. He took them to his house on Ravi Road. He had accomplices, teenage boys, including one named Sajid, who had himself been a victim before being recruited, in a pattern that echoes Dean Coral in Houston a generation earlier. The victims were assaulted and killed. Their remains were placed in vats of hydrochloric acid and later emptied into the river. He photographed each boy, he kept their clothes, he maintained notebooks, and for 6 months, in a city of several million people, nobody connected the disappearances. That is the sentence that has to sit in the middle of this segment, because it is the sentence that explains everything else. These were children whose absence generated no search. Some were reported missing by parents who were told, as parents in Houston were told in 1972, and parents in Milwaukee were told in 1991, that boys that age leave on their own. Some were never reported at all, because there was nobody to report them. The children of Minari Pakistan were not invisible because nobody could see them. They were visible every day to every person who walked past them. They were invisible because nobody with authority was counting. There was no missing children database. There was no system for cross-referencing reports. There was no mechanism for noticing that dozens of boys from the same parks and streets had vanished in the same few months. Some of the parents did go to the police. They were poor people, many of them illiterate, walking into stations to report children the system had already classified as runaways. The reception they received is documented in the case record and in media accounts from the time, and it is consistent with what you have heard in this series about Houston, about Milwaukee, about Rochester, about Rostov. Javed Iqbal understood exactly who would not be looked for, and he was correct for 6 months. When he surrendered, the case moved fast. He was tried before Additional Sessions Judge Allah Bakhsh Ranja at an anti-terrorism court in Lahore, and on the 16th of March 2000, the judge handed down a sentence that made international news and generated immediate controversy. Iqbal was convicted on 100 counts of murder. He received 100 death sentences. And the judge ordered that the execution be carried out publicly, that Iqbal be strangled with the same chain he had used on the boys in front of the victims' parents, and that his body then be dismembered into 100 pieces and dissolved in acid, mirroring what he had done to them. Iqbal himself had suggested this form of execution in his original confession letter. The judge granted it. Pakistan's interior minister responded within days, saying the government would challenge the sentence and that this form of punishment was not legally permissible. Asma Jahangir, a leading human rights lawyer and a United Nations investigator, called the sentence barbaric and said it aroused what she described as the fascistic instincts in a society. The Council of Islamic Ideology ruled that the sentence violated Islamic tenets, which require respect for the body of the deceased. The conventional sentence hanging remained in force pending appeal. Now here is where the case becomes something else entirely. At trial, Javed Iqbal recanted his confession. He stood in the courtroom and said he was innocent, that he had not killed anyone. He maintained this position for the rest of his life. And after his death, 26 of the 100 boys he had claimed as victims were found alive. That does not mean he killed nobody. Police recovered human remains from his house. Forensic examination confirmed they belonged to boys in the age range he had described. More than 80 families identified photographs or clothing as belonging to their missing sons. But it means the precise, round, theatrical number that he wrote in his own letter and delivered to a newspaper was not accurate. Whether he inflated it deliberately, whether some of the boys escaped, or whether some of the photographs were of children he had assaulted but not killed has never been resolved. What is certain is that he chose the number. 100 is not a count. It is a statement. On the 8th of October, 2001, Javed Iqbal and his accomplice Sajid were found dead in their cells at Kot Lakhpat jail in Lahore. Prison authorities declared the deaths suicides and said both men had hanged themselves with bedsheets tied to iron bars. The evidence told a different story. Police investigators who examined the scene said that 2 people committing suicide simultaneously in adjacent cells by the same method was not plausible. Doctors at the city mortuary found strangulation marks around both men's necks, bleeding from the mouth and nostrils, blue discoloration of the hands, feet, and nails, and a cut mark on the tongue of one of the deceased. Numerous healed wounds inflicted with a blunt weapon were found across Iqbal's body. Their deaths came just 4 days after the country's highest Islamic court had agreed to hear their appeal against the death sentence. Iqbal's lawyer said publicly that his client had been the victim of a police conspiracy. Iqbal himself had expressed fear, since the beginning of the case, that the police would kill him. It was the reason he had surrendered to a newspaper rather than a station. Nobody was charged. No investigation produced a public finding. Nobody from his family came to collect the body. His brothers told reporters that Javed had died for them the day he confessed to killing 100 children. In 2022, a Pakistani film about the case was produced. It was initially banned by the Punjab government. The ban was eventually lifted, and the film was screened, and a generation of Pakistanis who had been too young to remember the case encountered it for the first time. It is now more than 25 years since the boys of Minar-e-Pakistan began disappearing. Some of their families received a photograph or a shoe as proof. Some received nothing at all. Here is what this case shares with nearly every other case in this series and what makes it worse. Javed Iqbal was wealthy. He was educated. He had a documented history of sexual offenses against children stretching back to the mid-1980s. He was arrested and released without conviction. He then spent years building businesses whose sole purpose was to attract children. He was not hiding in a crawl space or a forest or a locked apartment. He was operating in a major city, in a house on a named street with accomplices for 6 months, killing a child every day and a half. And the reason it lasted 6 months is that the children he selected had already been abandoned by every system that should have been protecting them. That is not a Pakistani failure. It is the same failure you have heard described in every country this series has visited: the United States, Germany, Russia, Colombia, Ecuador, Indonesia, England. The victims change. The languages change. The specific institution that fails changes. The principle does not. A society that does not count its most vulnerable children will eventually produce a man who understands that and who acts on it. Number 3. Tsutomu Miyazaki. In the summer of 1989, police in Japan raided anime shops, fan clubs, and private collections across the country. They were not looking for a killer. They had already caught him. What they were doing was something different, and something this series has not encountered before. They were looking for a motive not in a suspect's biography or his relationships, but in a culture. An entire subculture of millions of people had been named as the explanation for what one man had done, and the state was acting on that explanation. The word was otaku. It described, loosely, people with intense hobbyist interests: anime, manga, model kits, video games, computer hardware. In 1989, it was a niche term. Within weeks of the arrest, it became a slur. The man who caused that was Tsutomu Miyazaki. He killed 4 children. And what happened afterward changed Japanese culture in ways that are still being measured. This is the segment in this series where the least will be said about the crimes themselves, and the reason is simple. The victims were 4, 7, and 4 years old. The acts committed against them are in the court record, and describing them serves nothing. What can be said, and must be said, is that they included acts of extreme violence, and that Miyazaki later sent materials and written communications to the families of the children he had killed. That is sufficient. The rest of this segment is about what surrounded those acts and what followed them. He was born on August 21st, 1962, in Itsukaichi on the western edge of Tokyo, into a wealthy family. He was born premature, and the birth left him with a rare condition called radioulnar synostosis, a fusion of the bones in both forearms that left his hands permanently gnarled and immobile at the wrists. He could not rotate them. To turn a hand, he had to move the entire arm. That deformity defined his childhood. He was ostracized at school, excluded from physical activity, and mocked consistently. He withdrew. He had been, initially, a strong student near the top of his class. By high school, his grades had collapsed. He had wanted to study English and become a teacher. His academic performance was no longer good enough for the university he had aimed at. He enrolled instead in a local junior college and studied to become a photo technician. He retreated into media. He amassed a collection of videotapes, horror films, anime, and other material that eventually numbered 5,763 cassettes, stacked from floor to ceiling in his small living quarters. The collection is the most important single object in this case, not because of what it contained, but because of what the press said it contained. When police searched his rooms after his arrest, they found the tapes. They also found footage and photographs of his victims interspersed among them. The press photographed the room. The images ran on front pages and on television, a small space completely walled in video cassettes, a man buried in media. And almost immediately, the collection was described as being overwhelmingly composed of anime and manga. It was not. Later analysis, including work by the cultural critic Eiji Otsuka, established that the vast majority of the tapes were recorded television programs, films, and assorted material. The proportion that was anime-related was small. His collection was not meaningfully different in composition from that of many other habitual home tapers in late 1980s Japan, when recording television onto VHS was a near-universal domestic activity. That correction never caught up with the original story. What caught was the image, a killer surrounded by cartoons. His grandfather had been the one person in his life with whom he had a genuine relationship. When the old man died in May of 1988, Miyazaki's behavior deteriorated rapidly. He consumed some of the cremated remains, a detail he described matter-of-factly in custody. 3 months later, the killing began. Mari Kono was 4 years old. She disappeared on August 22, 1988 in Saitama Prefecture. Masami Yoshizawa was 7. She was taken on October 3rd, also in Saitama. Erika Namba was 4. She disappeared on December 12th. Ayako Nomoto was 4. She was taken on June 6, 1989. The investigation was complicated by the geography. The abductions crossed prefectural lines between Saitama and Tokyo, and by the difficulty of finding witnesses. A man in a car taking a small child does not always register as an abduction to bystanders. He can look like a father. The families received communications, cards, letters, and in one case, a package containing cremated remains. The Kono family received a box of what appeared to be their daughter's remains, labeled and arranged. Saitama Prefecture was in a state of open fear. Parents walked children to and from school in groups. The press named the unknown killer the little girl murderer, and later Dracula. Miyazaki was caught on the 23rd of July, 1989 in Hachioji, Tokyo, in circumstances that had nothing to do with the murder investigation. He was photographing a young girl in a park. Her father found him, confronted him, and held him until police arrived. The initial charge was a minor offense. It was only after police searched his home and found the tapes including footage of his victims that the connection was made. He confessed, and the confession was detailed and calm. His trial began in 1990 and lasted 7 years, one of the longest criminal proceedings in Japanese history. 3 separate teams of psychiatric experts examined him. His defense argued insanity, citing evidence of dissociative identity disorder he had, at various points, referred to an alternate self he called Rat Man, and had behaved erratically in custody. The court concluded he was sane, aware of the nature of his actions, and capable of understanding their consequences. He was sentenced to death in 1997. He appealed. The Tokyo High Court upheld the sentence in 2001. The Supreme Court of Japan upheld it again in 2006. Throughout the trial and the appeals, Miyazaki showed no remorse, offered no apology to the families, and appeared by every account indifferent. He was executed by hanging at the Tokyo Detention House on June 17, 2008. He was 45. Now here is the part of this case that matters most, and it has almost nothing to do with him. In the weeks and months after his arrest, the Japanese media constructed a narrative. It was not complicated. Tsutomu Miyazaki had been obsessed with anime and manga. Anime and manga had warped his mind. Therefore, anime and manga were dangerous, and the people who consumed them were suspect. The word otaku, which had been used casually, sometimes self-deprecatingly, by hobbyists to describe their own enthusiasms, was rebranded overnight into a marker of deviance. Otaku were portrayed as socially isolated, sexually dysfunctional, potentially violent loners whose fictional obsessions disconnected them from reality. News programs ran segments on otaku culture as though it were a public health crisis. Shops were raided. Fan clubs were investigated. Men who collected anime merchandise were treated by neighbors, employers, and strangers as potential threats. Millions of people. Because of one man. It was, as later scholars noted, structurally identical to the Satanic Panic that had swept the United States a few years earlier, the same leap from a handful of criminal cases to a sweeping cultural indictment, the same willingness to blame a medium rather than examine a person. There was no causal link established in court between Miyazaki's media consumption and his crimes. His psychiatric evaluations pointed to personality disorders, not to cultural influence. The overwhelming majority of his tape collection was not anime. The narrative was false in its premises and disproportionate in its conclusions. It did not matter. The moral panic ran for years. It took more than a decade for the word otaku to begin recovering in Japanese public discourse, and even now, more than 35 years later, the association has not fully dissolved. Miyazaki killed 4 children. That is the crime, and it is monstrous, and it requires no cultural explanation. What required an explanation was why an entire country decided, within a matter of weeks, that a subculture of hobbyists was responsible for the acts of a single man, and why the press, the police, and the public were so willing to accept it. The answer is the same one that runs through every case in this series. It is easier to blame a thing you can point at a videotape, a song, a game, a subculture, than to confront the possibility that a society produced a man like this and did not see him coming. 4 girls were taken from parks and roadsides by a man in a car in broad daylight in one of the most densely populated regions on Earth. Mari Kono was 4. Masami Yoshizawa was 7. Erika Namba was 4. Ayako Nomoto was 4. They are the case. Everything else, the tapes, the label, the panic, is what a country built on top of them so it did not have to look at what was underneath. Number 4. Randy Kraft. In the early hours of May 14, 1983, 2 California Highway Patrol officers on the Interstate 5 in Mission Viejo noticed a Toyota Celica weaving across lanes. They pulled it over. The driver was cooperative and pleasant, a neatly dressed 38-year-old man who smelled of beer. Routine DUI. They told him to step out and began the standard process. Then one of the officers walked around to the passenger side to check on the man in the other seat. He was sitting upright. His eyes were open. His shoes were off. He was dead. The driver's name was Randy Stephen Kraft. The man in his passenger seat was a 25-year-old Marine named Terry Lee Gambrell, stationed at El Toro. In the trunk of the car, officers found a briefcase. Inside the briefcase was a piece of paper, folded, covered in handwriting. It appeared to be a list 61 short entries, in code. Stable, Marine Down. Skates, parking lot. Deodorant, Hollywood bus. Portland Head. 2 and 1 loss. Nobody in that patrol car understood what they were reading. Within weeks, investigators realized the entries corresponded to murdered young men some found months earlier. some found years earlier, some not yet found at all. It was a scorecard. Randy Kraft had been killing for 12 years, and the list in his briefcase suggested he had done it at least 61 times. Here is the first thing to understand about this case, and it is the thing that explains why almost nobody outside the true crime community knows his name. He was not alone on the freeway. In the 1970s and early 1980s, Southern California produced 3 separate serial killers who were all targeting young men along the same highway corridors at the same time. William Bonin, the original freeway killer, murdered at least 14 young men and boys between 1979 and 1980, picking them up along freeways in Orange County and Los Angeles. He was arrested in 1980 and executed in 1996. Patrick Kearney, the trash bag killer, murdered at least 21 young men between 1965 and 1977, shooting them and leaving their remains in black bags along highways. He was arrested in 1977 and is still in prison. And Randy Kraft was killing throughout the same period, in the same geography, using the same highways, targeting the same population. 3 killers, 1 region, overlapping years. When bodies started appearing along Southern California freeways in the 70s, investigators initially assumed they were dealing with one man. They called him the freeway killer. They were dealing with 3, and they did not know it for years. That is why Kraft operated for 12 years. Not because he was brilliant, though he was intelligent, but because the deaths he caused were absorbed into a body count that was already being attributed to someone else. Bonin's arrest in 1980 did not stop the killings, and investigators had to reckon with the possibility that they had the wrong man, or that there were more. There were more. Randy Stephen Kraft was born on March 19, 1945, in Long Beach, California, and grew up in Westminster in Orange County. He was the youngest of 4 children in a conservative, middle-class family. He was, by every metric that existed at the time, a success. He tested with an IQ of 129. He graduated from high school with honors. He enrolled at Claremont Men's College, a prestigious liberal arts institution, and excelled. He joined the Reserve Officer Training Corps. He campaigned for Barry Goldwater in the 1964 presidential election. He was clean-cut, articulate, well-liked, and exactly the kind of young man Southern California in the early 1960s was designed to produce. Then, in his mid-20s, he came out as gay. In the context of Orange County in 1968, that was not a neutral act. He lost friendships, changed social circles, and moved into a different world: bars, nightlife, and a community that was, in that era, substantially underground. He was drafted and served in the Air Force. He was discharged. Sources differ on the specific circumstances, but he described it later as related to his sexuality and to drug use. He came home and took work in the computer industry, eventually becoming a systems analyst. He was good at it. Colleagues described him as competent, sociable, and professional. He lived with a long-term partner. He hosted dinner parties. He was, by every visible measure, an unremarkable, successful man. The first suspected victim was Wayne Joseph Duquette, a 30-year-old bartender at a Long Beach gay bar called The Stable, found dead in 1971. The first entry on the scorecard reads Stable. That is where the case begins, and the scorecard is the reason it exists in the form it does. The entries are short, coded, and deeply personal, not to the victims, but to the circumstances. Marine Down, Marine Head PCH Harikari, 2 in 1 loss. Portland Head, Airplane Hill. Angel. Investigators spent years matching entries to unsolved cases, working backward from the names and locations and physical descriptions of unidentified young men found along highways, in ravines, near military bases, and beside rural roads. Some entries matched immediately. Marine Carson was Richard Allen Keith, a 20-year-old Marine killed in Carson in 1978. Marine head PCH was Scott Michael Hughes, also a Marine, found on the Pacific Coast Highway. Others took decades. In 2023, genetic genealogy identified a body found near a California trail in 1974 as 17-year-old Michael Ray Schlicht of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, last seen by his sister that April. In 2025, Larry Eugene Parks, a 35-year-old Vietnam veteran found strangled on the I-5 in Oregon in 1980, was identified and linked to Kraft. Some entries have never been matched to anyone. They remain codes on a piece of paper, corresponding to men who may still be listed as missing, or who were never listed at all. His method was consistent and built around the geography of Southern California. He drove the freeways at night, he picked up hitchhikers, young men walking near military bases, and men leaving bars. He offered rides, he offered beer. What investigators found over and over was that the victims had been heavily sedated Valium, alcohol, or both before they were killed. Many of the victims were Marines. Camp Pendleton, El Toro, Tustin, the bases of Orange County and San Diego County, produced a steady population of young men, often alone, often drinking, often hitchhiking between base and town. In 1975, Kraft was briefly a suspect when the severed head of a young man named Keith Crotwell was recovered near the Long Beach Marina. Crotwell, 20, had last been seen leaving a bar with Kraft. Kraft was questioned, denied involvement, and was released. The case went cold. That was 8 years before the traffic stop. Keith Crotwell is believed to correspond to a scorecard entry. His body has never been found. This is the pattern you have now heard across this entire series. A man is questioned, released, and continues. Kraft's arrest in 1983 produced the largest single-defendant murder trial in California history at that time. It began in September of 1988, 5 years after the arrest, and ran for 13 months. The prosecution presented evidence linking Kraft to 16 murders in meticulous clinical detail. Carpet fibers from his car on victims' clothing. Prescription medications in his name found in toxicology results. Photographs recovered from his home. The scorecard. Kraft maintained his innocence. His explanation for the scorecard was that it was a list of people he intended to invite to a surprise party for his partner. The jury did not accept it. On May 12, 1989, he was convicted of 16 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances, along with related charges of sodomy and mutilation. He was sentenced to death on November 29, 1989. He has never confessed. He has never explained the scorecard. He has never provided information about the entries that remain unmatched. He is alive. He is 81 years old. He is held at the California Institution for Men in San Bernardino County on a death row that California has not used since 2006. Governor Gavin Newsom signed a moratorium on executions in 2019. The state's death row population has been gradually dispersed into the general prison system. Randy Kraft will, in all likelihood, die of natural causes. Investigators in multiple states are still working his cases. The genetic genealogy identifications of Schlicht and Parks in the last 3 years suggest the true number of victims is higher than 67. Cold case units in Oregon, Michigan, and California have open files. The scorecard has 61 entries, 16 produced convictions. Perhaps 20 more have been tentatively matched. The rest are shorthand for events that only one man understands, and he has spent 43 years saying nothing. Now step back and look at what Southern California actually was in the 1970s. 3 serial killers working the same highways at the same time, targeting young men, many of them gay, many of them hitchhiking, many of them Marines far from home. When those men disappeared or turned up dead, they were filed as overdoses, accidents, transient deaths, or casualties of a lifestyle that 1970s law enforcement did not regard as deserving of significant investigative effort. Gay men found dead along highways in Orange County in 1976 were not front-page news. They were not task force cases. They were not assigned to senior detectives. William Bonin killed for over a year before a task force was formed. Patrick Kearney killed for 12 years. Randy Kraft killed for 12 years. 3 men, 1 region, 35 years of total operating time between them. None of them was a criminal genius. The system they exploited was not their intelligence. It was the calculations shared independently by all 3 that the men they chose would not be prioritist. They were correct for a combined total of roughly 100 victims. The freeways of Southern California in the 1970s were the same hunting ground as the railway stations of Rostov, the streets of the Houston Heights, and Lyell Avenue in Rochester. Different geography, different decade. The same principle. A society that does not investigate certain deaths with the same urgency it investigates others will eventually produce someone who understands the gap and walks into it. Southern California produced 3 of them at once. Randy Kraft is the last of the 3 still alive, and he has the longest list, and nobody knows all the names on it. Number 5. Joachim Kroll. In 1959, a mechanic named Heinrich Ott was arrested in the small Rhineland city of Rheinhausen for the murder of a 24-year-old woman named Clara Frieda Tesmer. He had not done it. He could not prove he had not done it. And in his cell, unable to clear his name, Heinrich Ott hanged himself. In 1962, a man named Vinzenz Kuhn was arrested and convicted for the murder of a 13-year-old girl named Petra Giese. He had not done it either. In 1966, a 20-year-old woman named Ursula Rohling was found dead near Duisburg. Her boyfriend, Adolf Schickel, was publicly accused. He had not done it. The accusation destroyed him. Adolf Schickel took his own life. That same decade, a man named Walter Quicker was arrested for the murder of 12-year-old Monika Taffal. He was eventually released for lack of evidence, but his neighbors had heard the accusation, and they did not forget it. The harassment that followed drove Walter Quicker to end his own life. 4 men, 3 of whom died for crimes committed by a single person who was, at that moment, living in a rented flat in Duisburg, working as a lavatory attendant at a steel factory, and attracting the attention of nobody at all. His name was Joachim Georg Kroll. He killed for 21 years. He was tested at an IQ of 76, and when he was finally arrested, he told police he had assumed they would give him a simple operation to cure him of his urges and then let him go. This is the segment in this series where the killer is, in every measurable sense, the least capable person in it. And the system failed worse here than in almost any other case you have heard. He was born on April 17, 1933, in Hindenburg, Upper Silesia, a city now called Zabrzydzia in modern Poland. He was the 6th of 9 children in a miner's family. The war took his father as a prisoner. The family was displaced westward in the upheaval that followed 1945, part of the mass migration of ethnic Germans from the Eastern Territories. They resettled in North Rhine-Westphalia in the industrial Ruhr Valley. Kroll dropped out of school in the 3rd grade. He could barely read. He was small, timid, and described by everyone who knew him in precisely the same terms: quiet, odd, harmless, a man you would not remember meeting. He began killing in February of 1955, shortly after his mother's death. Irmgard Strahl, 19 years old, was his first known victim, found in a barn near Eldinghausen. And here is what made Joachim Kroll nearly impossible to catch, and it was not anything he did. It was what the Ruhr was. The Ruhr metropolitan region in the 1950s and 60s was one of the most densely populated industrial corridors in Europe. Millions of people lived and worked across a sprawl of cities that bled into one another: Essen, Duisburg, Dortmund, Bochum, Gelsenkirchen, Oberhausen. Each had its own police force. Each maintained its own case files. There was no centralized criminal database linking them. A murder in Duisburg and a murder in Essen, committed 4 miles apart, sat in 2 separate filing cabinets in 2 separate buildings, investigated by 2 separate teams who had no routine mechanism for comparing notes. Kroll moved between these jurisdictions the way Chikatilo moved between railway towns and Garavito moved between Colombian departments. He did not need to be clever. He needed only to cross a city boundary, and the trail stopped. He also benefited grotesquely from the presence of other killers in the region. Werner Boost had been murdering couples in the Ruhr in the early 1950s, and his case absorbed investigative attention and created a template that did not fit Kroll's victims. When women turned up dead across the Ruhr in the following years, some were attributed to Boost or to copycats or to domestic violence. The idea that there might be yet another predator operating in the same geography was slow to form. So the files sat, separated by city lines, and when pressure built to close a case, the pressure landed on whoever was nearest. Heinrich Ott was nearest. Vinzenz Kien was nearest. Adolf Schickel was nearest. Walter Quicker was nearest. 4 men accused, 3 of them dead by their own hand. 1 wrongfully convicted and imprisoned for years, and the man responsible was cleaning toilets at a Mannesmann factory and living in a small flat in a housing block in the Lahr district of Duisburg, where his neighbors knew him as a harmless oddity who was good with children. That detail, good with children, appears in multiple accounts, and it is the one that should stop you. He killed children. Erika Schuliter was 12, Petra Gysi was 13, Monika Tafel was 12, Ilona Hark was 5, Barbara Bruder was 12, her body was never found, Karen Topfer was 10, and a 4-year-old girl named Marion Ketter. Marion Ketter was his last victim, and she is the reason he was caught. On the 3rd of July, 1976, Marion disappeared from a playground in the Lahr district of Duisburg. She lived in the same apartment block as Kroll. Police searched the area. A neighbor approached an officer and mentioned something that had struck him as peculiar. He had been going to use the shared toilet in the building's hallway, and another resident, a quiet man from upstairs, had stopped him and told him not to use it. When the neighbor asked why, the man said it was blocked up. Blocked up with what? With guts, the man said. A plumber was called. He found the drain blocked with what he initially assumed was animal remains. Police went to Kroll's apartment. On the stove, in a saucepan, they found what they found. Marion Ketter had been 4 years old. Joachim Kroll was arrested without resistance. He was, by every account, bewildered. He appeared to genuinely believe that he was going to be given a medical procedure that would fix whatever was wrong with him, and that he would then be released. In custody, he explained the acts in terms that investigators found almost impossible to process. He said he had taken flesh from some of his victims because meat was expensive. He was not performing madness. Psychiatric evaluation established that he was intellectually disabled but legally sane, capable of understanding that what he did was wrong and of choosing to do it anyway. He was not a man driven by complex fantasy, like Rader or Chikatilo. He was not a man playing a part, like Bundy or Berkowitz. He was a profoundly limited individual who had discovered, at 22, that he could do something terrible and get away with it. And then he got away with it for 21 years, not because he was good at hiding, but because the system around him was so fragmented that nobody assembled the picture. His trial opened in October of 1979 at the Duisburg Schurgericht, and ran for 151 days. He was charged with 8 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. When his confessions were matched against unsolved cases, 6 investigations that had already resulted in wrongful arrests or convictions had to be reopened. 6 innocent men had been accused. At least 3 of them were dead. The court convicted him on all counts on April 8, 1982. West Germany had abolished the death penalty in 1949. He was sentenced to life imprisonment on each count. Joachim Kroll died of a heart attack at Rheinbach prison on July 1, 1991. He was 58. He never expressed remorse in any form that was recorded. He appeared to the psychiatrists who examined him to have a genuinely limited understanding of what the word meant. Now here is the question this segment exists to ask, and it is not about Joachim Kroll. Every case in this series involves a killer who evaded capture. In most of them, the explanation involves some combination of intelligence, planning, geography, or the social invisibility of the victims. Kroll had none of those things. He was functionally illiterate, tested far below average intelligence, used no disguise, took no particular precautions, and killed in one of the most densely policed industrial regions in Europe. He was never caught because the police forces of the Ruhr did not talk to each other. He was never suspected because, when pressure came to close a case, someone else was always closer to the victim and easier to charge. And the real cost of that failure was not borne by Kroll. It was borne by Heinrich Ott, hanging in a cell for a crime he did not commit, by Adolf Schickel, destroyed by an accusation that had no basis, by Walter Quicker, cleared by the courts and convicted by his neighbors. Those men are casualties of the same investigation that failed to catch Joachim Kroll, and they should be named alongside his victims, because the system killed them too. Number 6. Anatoly Onoprienko. In March of 1996, agents of the Security Service of Ukraine detained a 26-year-old man named Yuri Mozola on suspicion of committing a series of brutal family murders across the Ukrainian countryside. Over 3 days, 6 SBU officers and a representative of the public prosecutor's office interrogated him. They beat him. They burned him. They administered electric shocks. Yuri Mozola refused to confess to something he had not done. On the 4th day, he died. The 7 men responsible were later convicted and given prison sentences. 17 days after Yuri Mozola's death, investigators found the actual killer. His name was Anatoly Onoprienko, and by the time they reached him, he had murdered 52 people, most of them in the previous 6 months. If you have been following this series, you recognize the pattern. In Rostov, Alexander Kravchenko was executed for Chikatilo's first murder. In the Ruhr, at least 3 innocent men took their own lives after being accused of Joachim Kroll's crimes. And in Ukraine, in 1996, a young man was tortured to death in custody for murders committed by a man who was, at that moment, staying at his girlfriend's flat in a village near the Polish border. The system that cannot catch the killer creates victims of its own. Anatoly Yuryovich Onoprienko was born on July 25, 1959, in the village of Lasky, in the Zhytomyr Oblast of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. His father Yuri had been decorated for bravery during the Second World War. His older brother, Valentin, was 13 years his senior. When Anatoly was 4 years old, his mother died. His father made a decision. He kept Valentin. He gave Anatoly away first to relatives, then to an orphanage in the village of Privitno. Onoprienko never forgave it. In every interview, every confession, every statement he made across 2 decades, that abandonment was the fact he returned to. He told one interviewer that it had predetermined his destiny, and he told another that 70% of children raised in Soviet orphanages ended up in prison as adults. The second statement was closer to true than the first. He grew up in institutional care, drifted through education, studied forestry at university, and worked for a period as a merchant sailor. He married, had a son, and divorced. By the late 1980s, he had a criminal record for theft and burglary. And then, in 1989, the killing began. His first murders were committed with an accomplice, a man named Sergei Rogozin. Together, they attacked a family in the village of Bratkovichi. 2 adults and several children were killed. Later that year, Onoprienko shot 5 people sleeping in a car, including an 11-year-old boy, and set the vehicle on fire. Then he disappeared. Between 1989 and late 1995, there is a gap of roughly 6 years. What is confirmed is that during that period, Onoprienko was expelled from both Austria and Germany. The circumstances are not fully documented, but investigators later explored whether unsolved cases in those countries might be connected to him. What caused him to resume, and to resume at a rate that exceeded anything else in this series, has never been adequately explained. In December of 1995, Anatoly Onoprienko began killing entire families. Over the following 4 months, from late December through March of 1996, he killed 43 people. That is not a typographical error. 43 people in roughly 120 days. His method was consistent and systematic. He targeted isolated houses in rural villages, the kind of places where the nearest neighbor is across a field and the nearest police station is in the next town. He arrived at night, armed with a sawn-off shotgun and, in some cases, an axe. He killed the adult male first. Then, the woman. Then the children. Then anyone else in the house. He ransacked the property for valuable small, portable things, jewelry, cash, watches. Then he set the house on fire. If he encountered a witness outside during the approach or the departure, someone walking on the road, someone passing in a car, he killed them too. He was not targeting specific people. He was targeting structures, a house with a light on, in a village with no police station, on a road with no traffic. The Zaichenko family in late December, 2 adults, 2 children. A family near Lviv, 2 adults, 2 children, and 1 male witness. The Pilot family in Brakovici, 2 adults, 3 children, and 2 witnesses. A woman named Marasina and her 2 young sons, and a man named Zagranichny. The Dubchak family, the Bodnarchuk family, and their neighbor Sok. The Novosad family. Families, entire families, erased from their own houses and then burned. Ukraine in the winter of 1995 to 1996 was in a state of profound institutional weakness. The Soviet Union had collapsed 4 years earlier. The economy had cratered. Law enforcement was underfunded, fragmented, and struggling to function across a country of 50 million people whose administrative systems were being rebuilt in real time. Rural Ukraine, the villages of the Zhytomyr, Lviv, and Kyiv oblasts, where Onoprienko operated, had always been poorly served by policing infrastructure. Now it was worse. Stations were understaffed. Communication between regions was unreliable. There was no equivalent of a national forensic database. When a family was found dead in a burned-out house in a village of 200 people, the investigation was handled locally, with whatever resources were available, and the results were not automatically shared with the next district. Onoprienko moved between oblasts the way Kroll moved between Ruhr cities, and Chikatilo moved between Soviet regions. Same principle. Same gap. But the scale of the killing in early 1996 was so extreme: multiple families, multiple villages, multiple oblasts, all within weeks, that it could not be absorbed into the background. Panic spread across the Ukrainian countryside. Villagers formed armed patrols. Families slept in shifts. The government deployed a military division alongside more than 2,000 police investigators. It was one of the largest manhunts in the history of Eastern Europe. And then Yuri Mozola was detained and tortured and killed. And the manhunt continued without its quarry being any closer. The arrest, when it came, had nothing to do with the manhunt. Onoprienko had been staying with a cousin named Pyotr. Pyotr discovered a stash of weapons in his house, a shotgun, ammunition, and items that clearly belonged to other people. Pyotr confronted him. Onoprienko became threatening. Pyotr asked him to leave, and after he had gone, went to the police. Anatoly Onoprienko was arrested on April 16, 1996, at his girlfriend Anna's apartment. He offered no significant resistance. Police recovered 122 items from his possession: weapons, jewelry, watches, and personal effects belonging to victims across multiple oblasts. In custody, he initially admitted to 8 murders. Then the number grew and grew until it reached 52. He told investigators he had been following orders, voices, an inner force, a dark compulsion. He said at one point that he was on a mission from God, and at another that he felt like a robot. These claims should be weighed the same way this series has weighed every similar claim from Berkowitz's Demon Dog, to Shawcross's Vietnam Fantasies, to Kroll's expectation of a curative operation. They are statements made by men in custody who understand the difference between a prison and a hospital. His trial began in late 1998 at the Zhytomyr courthouse, with the defendant held inside a steel cage, the third iron cage in this series, after Chikatilo and Pichushkin. There was a procedural delay that was uniquely Ukrainian. Under the country's legal code, the defendant was required to read every volume of evidence against him before the trial could begin. There were 99 volumes. Onoprienko reviewed them at his own pace. In the courtroom, he admitted to all 52 murders. He told the judge he felt like God, that he had total power over life and death. He told investigators separately that he had wanted to hold the world record for killing. Hundreds of spectators attended, and some had to be restrained. On March 31, 1999, he was convicted of 52 murders and sentenced to death by shooting. That sentence was never carried out. In 1995, Ukraine had joined the Council of Europe and, as a condition of membership, had undertaken to abolish the death penalty. The sentence was commuted to life imprisonment in August of 1999. Onoprienko spent the following 14 years in prison in Zhytomyr. He gave occasional interviews in which he expressed no remorse. In one, he said that if he were ever released, he would start killing again, and that it would be 10 times worse. He was never released. Anatoly Onoprienko died of heart failure on August 27, 2013, in Zhytomyr prison. He was 54 years old. His family did not speak publicly about his death. Here is what this case is, underneath the scale. Anatoly Onoprienko killed 52 people, 43 of them in roughly 4 months. He killed families, parents, and children together in their own homes at night. He killed witnesses who happened to be in the wrong place. And the reason he operated for 7 years across the most intense period of it is that he was working in a country whose institutions had collapsed, whose police could not communicate across district lines, and whose security services, under pressure to produce a result, tortured an innocent man to death rather than admit they did not have one. Yuri Mozola was 26. He had done nothing. He refused to confess to crimes he had not committed, and he died for that refusal 17 days before the actual killer was found staying at his girlfriend's flat with 122 stolen items and a shotgun. His name belongs in this segment as much as any of the 52. The cousin who found the weapons and went to the police, Pyotr Onoprienko, who shared his surname and had let him into his home, is the person who ended this case. Not the manhunt, not the military, not the 2,000 investigators. A relative who opened a cupboard and understood what he was looking at. Number 7. Rodney Alcala. In September of 1978, a man walked onto a television soundstage in Hollywood, California, sat on a stool behind a partition, and smiled for the cameras. He was introduced as a successful photographer. He had long brown hair, good teeth, and a tan. The host read out his hobbies: skydiving, motorcycling. He won. The woman on the other side of the partition, a young actress named Cheryl Bradshaw, chose him over the other two contestants. She never went on the date. She told producers afterward that something about him made her skin crawl. At the moment that episode was recorded, the man sitting on that stool was a registered sex offender with 2 prison sentences behind him, one for the sexual assault of an 8-year-old girl, one for the assault of a 13-year-old, and he had already killed at least 2 people. The show's producers had not checked. His name was Rodney James Alcala. Investigators believe he may have killed as many as 130 people across the United States, and when he died on death row in 2021, a storage locker full of photographs of unidentified women and girls was still generating tips. He was born Rodrigo Jacques Alcala on August 23, 1943, in San Antonio, Texas, the son of a Mexican immigrant father who abandoned the family when the boy was young. His mother moved the children to Los Angeles. He was intelligent, reportedly tested at a near-genius level, and he was aware of it from a young age in a way that shaped everything he did afterward. He joined the Army at 17 and was discharged after less than 4 years following a nervous breakdown. Back in Los Angeles, he enrolled at UCLA and studied fine arts. He was, by every account, a capable and ambitious student. His professors were later stunned, which is a word that appears in almost every account and which carries with it the same weight as it does in every other case in this series where colleagues describe the man they thought they knew. Then came September 25, 1968, and this is where the case actually begins. A bystander in Hollywood saw a man lure an 8-year-old girl named Tali Shapiro into his car. The bystander followed the vehicle and called the police. An LAPD officer named Chris Camacho arrived at an apartment on de Longpre Avenue and knocked on the door. There was no answer. He forced entry. Inside, he found Tali Shapiro. She had been beaten with a steel bar and was unconscious but alive. Alcala had fled through a rear exit. Tali Shapiro survived. She required extensive medical treatment and her recovery was long, but she lived, and decades later she would return, as an adult, to testify in court. Alcala was gone. He disappeared completely for 3 years, and here is the detail that should reframe every minute that follows. While a fugitive from an attempted murder charge involving a child, Rodney Alcala enrolled at New York University's School of the Arts under the name John Berger. He attended classes. He submitted work. He was treated as a graduate student. Nobody checked. The FBI placed him on their 10 most wanted list. His photograph was circulated nationally. And in 1971, a counselor at an arts summer camp for children in New Hampshire recognized his face from the poster. He had been working at a camp for children while wanted by the FBI for the attempted murder of a child. He was arrested, extradited to California, and charged. But by this time, 3 years had passed, and Tali Shapiro's family understandably did not want their daughter, still a minor, to testify. Without her testimony, the case was reduced. Alcala pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and was sentenced to an indeterminate term. He served 34 months. He was paroled in 1974. Within 2 months, he was arrested again for the assault of a 13-year-old girl. He was convicted, served another 2 years, and was released in 1976. He was now a twice-convicted sex offender on the California registry. And in 1971, while he was living in New York under the name John Berger, a 23-year-old flight attendant named Cornelia Crilly was raped and strangled in her apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. In 1977, a 23-year-old woman named Ellen Jane Hover, the goddaughter of the entertainer Dean Martin, went missing after writing a name in her calendar, John Berger. Her body was found months later in Westchester County. Neither case was connected to Alcala at the time. They would not be solved for more than 30 years. Back in California, free and registered, Alcala did what he had always done. He took photographs. He was good at it, genuinely talented, which is part of what made the approach work. He would walk up to a young woman in a park, on a beach, outside a shop, and tell her she had a look, and that he was a professional photographer, and would she like to sit for some shots. Some of them said yes, and walked away afterward alive. Their photographs ended up in a storage locker alongside the photographs of those who did not. That is the horror of this case, and it is unique in this series. There are more than 1,000 photographs in that collection, and investigators do not know which of the people in them are alive and which are dead. In 2010, after his conviction, authorities released over 100 of those images publicly and asked anyone who recognized a face to come forward. 21 women identified themselves, 6 families identified a missing relative. Some of the photographs remain unmatched. His confirmed California victims were young women killed between 1977 and 1979. Jill Barkham, 18, found strangled in the Hollywood Hills in November of 1977. Georgia Wixted, 27, a nurse, killed in her Malibu apartment in December. Charlotte Lamb, 32, killed in the laundry room of an apartment complex in El Segundo in June of 1978. Jill Parento, 21, killed in her Burbank apartment in June of 1979. And Robin Samsoe. Robin Samsoe was 12 years old. On June 20th, 1979, she borrowed a friend's bicycle to ride to ballet class in Huntington Beach. She never arrived. A witness reported seeing a man with a camera approach Robin and her friend on the beach earlier that day, offering to take photographs. Robin's body was found 12 days later in the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains. Alcala was arrested on July 24, 1979, after a parole officer working from the witness description and the photography angle identified him as a possible suspect. In his storage locker, investigators found Robin Samsoe's earrings. He was convicted of her murder in 1980 and sentenced to death. That conviction was overturned by the California Supreme Court in 1984 because the jury had been improperly told about his prior sex offenses. He was retried in 1986, convicted again, and sentenced to death again. That conviction was overturned by a federal appeals court in 2003 because he had been prevented from presenting evidence in his defense. 3 trials, 2 reversals. Robin Samsoe's family lived through the case for 30 years. By the time the 3rd trial came, in 2010, technology had caught up. DNA evidence, drawn from samples taken during his imprisonment, linked Alcala to the murders of Barkham, Wixted, Lamb, and Parento cases that had been cold for over 3 decades. He was tried for all 5 murders at once, and this time he represented himself. Rodney Alcala, acting as his own attorney, questioned witnesses, cross-examined forensic experts, and at one point took the stand and interviewed himself, asking and answering questions in 2 different voices, referring to himself in the 3rd person. It was, by every account from people in the courtroom, a performance, not a defense. He was, as he had been on a television soundstage 32 years earlier, playing a role. The jury convicted him on all 5 counts. On March 9, 2010, he was sentenced to death for the 3rd time. Then, the older cases broke. In 2011, a New York grand jury indicted him for the murders of Cornelia Crilly and Ellen Hover, the 2 women killed in the 1970s while he was living in Manhattan as John Berger. DNA recovered from Crilly's preserved body matched his, and Hoover's diary entry naming John Berger completed the chain. He was extradited to New York in 2012. He pleaded guilty to both murders and was sentenced to 25 years to life. And in 2013, Christine Ruth Thornton's sister was browsing the database of Alcala's photographs that had been posted online. She recognized her sister. Christine Thornton had been 28 years old and 6 months pregnant when she disappeared in 1978. Her remains had been found in a remote area of Wyoming in 1982 and had gone unidentified for 3 decades. A photograph in a serial killer's storage locker, posted on the internet by investigators, was identified by a family member 35 years later. That identification led to murder charges filed in Wyoming in 2016. The charges were dropped when Alcala died. Rodney James Alcala died on July 24, 2021, at a hospital near Corcoran State Prison in California. He was 77. California had not executed anyone since 2006. In 2024, a film about the case was released, directed by and starring Anna Kendrick, who played Cheryl Bradshaw, the woman who chose Bachelor Number 1 on that soundstage in 1978, and then refused to go on the date because something about him was wrong. Kendrick said publicly that the research left her unable to sleep. Now step back and look at the timeline. In 1968, an LAPD officer found an 8-year-old girl beaten unconscious in an apartment. The man responsible fled. While a fugitive, he enrolled in a university, worked at a children's summer camp, and killed at least 2 women in New York, all under a fake name that nobody verified. When he was caught, the charges were reduced because the child victim's family would not let her testify. He served 34 months. He was paroled. He assaulted another child within weeks. He served 2 years. He was released, registered as a sex offender, and walked onto a television game show. Nobody checked. He killed at least 5 more people. He was convicted and sentenced to death. Overturned, convicted, and sentenced to death again. Overturned again, convicted a 3rd time. DNA matched him to 4 more. He pleaded guilty to 2 more in New York. He was charged with 1 more in Wyoming. Confirmed dead, 8 to 9, across 4 states. Suspected, up to 130, with a storage locker containing over 1,000 photographs of people whose names nobody knows. The detective who worked the case longest, Jeff Sheeman, said something that belongs at the end of this segment. He said that knowing how charming Alcala was, and how smart, and how many years he was free, he would not be surprised if the real number was 100, 150, or even 200. And then he said the thing that makes it worse. The photographs are still online. The database is still active. Some of them have never been identified. If you recognize someone, there is still a number to call. Number 8. Robert Pickton. In 1997, a woman stumbled out of a trailer on a pig farm in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. She had been stabbed. She had a handcuff on one wrist. She was bleeding badly. She managed to flag down a passing car. She was taken to a hospital where she told staff that the owner of the farm had attacked her. Police arrested Robert William Pickton and charged him with attempted murder. Then they dropped the charges. The Crown stayed the case, citing the victim's drug addiction as a factor that would undermine her credibility at trial. She had been telling the truth, and over the following 4 years, at least 15 more women disappeared from the streets of Vancouver's downtown east side and were taken to that same farm. This is the case in this series where the system failure is not a gap, or an oversight, or a jurisdictional fragmentation. It is a decision. A woman walked into a hospital covered in stab wounds, wearing a handcuff, and told the authorities exactly what had happened and exactly where. They believed her enough to arrest the man. And then they decided her testimony would not stand because of who she was. Robert William Picton, called Willie by everyone who knew him, was born on October 24, 1949, on a pig farm in Port Coquitlam, a small city in the Fraser Valley east of Vancouver. The farm had been in the family since the 40s. It was ramshackle, chaotic, and by the 1990s increasingly surrounded by suburban development. The Picton property was the kind of place that did not look right: rusting machinery, outbuildings, mud, and livestock visible from the road. Willie Picton had almost no formal education. He could barely read. He was small, 5 feet nothing, by the account of a former prison official, quiet, unkempt, and gave no impression of social competence whatsoever. He and his brother Dave inherited the property in the early 90s after their parents died. Dave handled the business side. Willie worked with the pigs. And from the mid-1990s onward, women began disappearing from Vancouver's downtown east side at a rate that should have been impossible to ignore. The downtown east side is a neighborhood in the oldest part of the city, a few blocks from the waterfront. It is one of the poorest urban postal codes in Canada. In the 90s, it had a large population of women involved in street-level sex work, many of them struggling with addiction, many of them Indigenous. They began disappearing, not one at a time, not sporadically, in clusters. By the late 90s, families, friends, and community organizations on the downtown east side were compiling their own lists, because the police were not. Sarah DeVries, Marnie Frey, Georgina Papin, Brenda Wolfe, Serena Abotsway, Mona Wilson, Andrea Joesbury, Deanne Rock, Jacqueline McDonnell, Heather Bottomley, Jennifer Firminger, Helen Hallmark, Patricia Johnson, Heather Chinnock, Tanya Holick, Sherry Irving, Inga Hall, Tiffany Drew, Cara Ellis, Debra Jones, Wendy Crawford, Carrie Koski, name after name. Dozens. In 1998, a community group gave the Vancouver Police Department a list of women who had gone missing from the area. The list was long enough that a dedicated task force was warranted. One was not formed. The reasons were the ones you have heard in every other case in this series. The women were sex workers and addicts. They moved frequently. Some had warrants. Some had been reported missing before and turned up. Each individual case, taken on its own, looked like a woman who had drifted out of contact. It was only when you put the list together that the pattern became visible, and nobody with authority was putting the list together. The Vancouver Police Department and the RCMP, which policed the surrounding municipalities including Port Coquitlam, did not coordinate effectively. The women disappeared from Vancouver. The farm was in Port Coquitlam. 2 jurisdictions, 2 forces. The same gap that let Kroll operate across Ruhr cities and Chikatilo operate across Soviet provinces, except this gap was 15 kilometers wide. Indigenous women's organizations and sex workers' advocacy groups pushed for a coordinated response for years. They were not taken seriously in the way they should have been, and a public inquiry would later confirm that in terms that left no room for interpretation. Robert Picton was arrested on February 5, 2002, on firearms charges, not murder charges. Officers executing a search warrant on the farm found items belonging to missing women. And then, the excavation began. What followed was the largest and most expensive crime scene investigation in Canadian history. The property covered 6.5 hectares. Forensic teams worked the site for over 2 years, sifting soil, dismantling structures, and processing a farm where pigs and industrial equipment had been in continuous operation for decades. The remains, or DNA, of 33 women were identified on the property. Picton had used a wood chipper. He had fed remains to his pigs. He had rendered material and mixed it with pork that was processed and, by at least one account, distributed The farm had hosted parties, raves, in fact organized by his brother, attended by hundreds of people, some of whom later described conditions that suggested they had been on a property where human remains were being processed in proximity to food production and livestock. In 2002, while in custody, Picton was placed in a cell with an undercover officer posing as a fellow inmate. The recording captured Picton describing what he had done. He said he had killed 49 women. He said his only regret was that he had not made it an even 50. He was charged with 26 counts of first-degree murder. The trial was divided. The Crown proceeded on 6 counts. First, the murders of Serena Abotsway, Mona Wilson, Andrea Joesbury, Brenda Ann Wolfe, Georgina Papin, and Marnie Frey. On December 9, 2007, the jury found Robert Picton not guilty of first-degree murder on all 6 counts. They found him guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder instead. The distinction matters. First-degree murder in Canada requires premeditation and planning. Second-degree means the jury accepted that Picton killed those women, but was not satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that the deaths were planned and deliberate in the legal sense. It was a verdict that left almost no one satisfied. The remaining 20 counts of first-degree murder were stayed by the Crown in 2010, meaning they were never tried. The official reasoning was that Picton was already serving a life sentence with no parole eligibility for 25 years, and that a second trial would cost tens of millions of dollars and re-traumatize families without changing the practical outcome. The families were, many of them, devastated. 20 women's cases were never heard. 20 families never had a verdict. In 2012, the Missing Women Commission of Inquiry, led by retired Judge Wally Oppel, published its report. It found systemic failures in policing, including a failure by the Vancouver Police Department and the RCMP to share information, a failure to treat the disappearances of women from the downtown east side with the same urgency applied to other missing persons cases, and a failure to act on available evidence, including the 1997 attempted murder charge that had been stayed. The report made over 60 recommendations. It concluded that institutional bias against Indigenous women and sex workers was a direct factor in the length and severity of the case. Chief Marilyn Slett of the Heiltsuk Tribal Council, speaking after Picton's death in 2024, said plainly that little had changed. Indigenous women, she said, still face a barrier of systemic racism when it comes to personal safety. Robert Picton spent 17 years in prison. He was small, frail, and by most accounts unremarkable inside the system. He was transferred from British Columbia to Port Cartier Institution, a maximum security facility in Quebec, in 2018. On May 19, 2024, he was assaulted by a fellow inmate named Martin Charest. Charest struck him, then broke a broom handle and drove it into his face. Picton was airlifted to hospital, placed in a medically induced coma, and died 12 days later on May 31, 2024. He was 74. Martin Charest was charged with first-degree murder in July of 2025. He has indicated through his lawyer that he intends to plead guilty. Picton's family did not speak publicly after his death. His brother Dave had died years earlier. Cynthia Cardinal, whose sister Georgina Papin was among the 6 women whose murders resulted in Picton's conviction, told reporters she was happy. She also said she was sad because most of the families never got their day in court. Michelle Pinote, whose daughter Stephanie Lane was killed at the age of 20, but whose death Picton was never charged for, called him an animal and said there had been no justice for her daughter. Both of those statements exist at the same time. They do not contradict each other. They are the same statement made by 2 mothers standing in 2 different parts of the same failure. Now here is what this case is actually about, and it is not about the farm. It is about 1997. A woman walked out of a trailer with a handcuff on her wrist and stab wounds on her body and told the police what had happened. They arrested the man. Then, they decided she was not credible enough to put in front of a jury, and they let him go. Between that decision and his arrest 5 years later, the DNA or remains of at least 15 more women were deposited on that property. 15 women, 5 years. One decision. The woman from the trailer survived. She has never been publicly named at her own request. She is the reason this case should have ended in 1997, and she is the reason it did not. Every other failure, the jurisdictional gap, the missing persons list nobody assembled, the two police forces that did not talk to each other, sits on top of that. But none of it would have mattered if someone had looked at a woman in a hospital bed wearing a handcuff and said, "I believe you."